Yay, we're on. I this app is getting more and more complicated. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. Brandon, are you there?
I'm here. I can hear you.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, good. And I see our special guest Mimi is on here. Let
To be
me.
here.
Hey. Okay. Welcome to the Love Insights Show, where we provide a cutting edge, research based perspective on dating and relationships. I'm your host, Arlene Washburn, a science based dating and relationship coach and matchmaker, recognized as the most innovative woman in matchmaking. And then joining me is my co host, Brandon Radar, an award winning psychological researcher and matchmaker. And every week, we delve into the latest insights and trends in dating and relationships to help you live your best life. Tonight, we have a very special guest, renowned expert Dr. Mimi Winsberg, joining us to cover this critical topic of unlocking the secrets of textual chemistry and beyond. So, welcome, Dr. Mimi. I'm going to have Brandon just give a quick overview of who you are because you're so amazing. Brandon, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, everybody. So, as Arlene said, we have a very special guest, Dr. Mimi Weinsberg, who is the author of Speaking in Thumbs. She is has been a psychiatrist for over 25 years, has been featured in major publications such as Forbes, Glamour, GQ. She's also been a recurring guest on Good Morning America, and she has a plethora of experience in the field and of mental health. And so we're very excited to hear from her as she tells us all about how to speak in thumbs. Hello.
Yay!
There you are, Mimi. It's wonderful to
Thanks.
see you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank
Um,
thank you
so
guys for having me.
I have I think my first question for you is what inspired you to write this book? It's brilliant, and I want to know, like, what was the inspiration for this?
Well, I've been a psychiatrist, as you mentioned, for quite a while, but I've been working for the last 10 years or so at the intersection of behavioral health and tech. And this includes working at innovative companies. I co-founded a company called Brightside Health, where we're delivering mental health through a telemedicine platform using innovative tools. And what I have found working at the intersection of tech and mental health is that text messages, including messages that patients may write to their providers, can be an important indicator of things like, is somebody depressed? Are they suicidal? Are they posing some kind of risk to themselves? And this, along with had the honor of serving as the psychiatrist at Facebook for 3 years, where I was treating probably some of the most tech savvy people in the world, and even they would find that when they were, getting text messages, that they wanted advice on what these text messages meant. And so I thought, well, there's got to be a book in this. If we could really understand how to decode what somebody's personality is and what their attachment style might be over text message, this could be very helpful. At the same time, I myself had gone through a separation and divorce, and was found myself on dating apps, and so I was putting some of these things into practice in my own life as well.
I love that. And I mean, I think we can all agree that text messaging has become the primary mode of communication worldwide, and especially in interpersonal relationships, which is what you're talking about. And I mean, I encounter this a lot with clients, the challenge of being catapulted back into the dating world, and trying to navigate this digital dating terrain and not understanding how to create textual chemistry and how to interpret text messages and how to send text messages to not just communicate, but to build a connection. I mean, I think it's really fascinating to hear that the inspiration of this was originally for mental health. And
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that texting is a relatively new language. We started texting in 2007. It's not that long in the grand scheme of relationship history, and yet it's the primary way we communicate now. It's how we meet people online. It's how we develop chemistry initially. It is very much how we're trying to forge these early steps in relationships. And so it's important to understand, one, to not have misunderstandings, but two, to bring your best self to the equation, right?
Yeah.
Yes, something that I saw that was so interesting, and I was telling Arlene about this, is that a lot of times when I'm talking to my clients about text messages, or they're just relaying information to me about an interaction that they had over text, they will oftentimes frame it in a way where they're inserting their interpretations of what the other person said. And then I'll ask them, well, what did they actually say over text? Can you send it to me? And what what my client is telling me versus what I'm reading is oftentimes very different. And I'm like, I'm confused. It's like, you said this. I'm like, so that was your interpretation, not what they actually said. So how did that play out in this whole process of creating understanding interpretations? Like, how did you investigate that side of speaking in thumbs?
Right. Well, you're absolutely correct that it's a mode of communication that's rife with interpretation because it lacks facial expression, it lacks tone of voice. There are all kinds of cues that are missing where, our words need to do the talking, really. Our written words need to do the talking, and of course emojis too can help clarify. But what you'll find if you read the book is that it's rife with screenshots. Just as you said, I basically, when I put out the when I wrote the book, I put out an APB and said, send me your screenshots of text messages, and they came flooding in. And these, I put my own in there. There are screenshots from patients, from friends, from the community at large. And what I found is that by including these visual, actual transcripts, and they're not made up. Some of them are very funny, but they're all real. And I could then take the latest behavioral science. So really look at what does the research show about what words mean, how we can parse the transcript to look for elements of chemistry, compatibility, things like that. And then I, of course, opine as well. So it's based both on latest behavioral health science and my own interpreting of the text messages in the book.
Love that.
I was just going to jump in here because Mimi, as you know, we spent some time together in Mexico, and I'm not a texter, and I have a hard time expressing my emotions or just conveying whatever it is I want to say over text. And I know it's a necessary evil because most people are using it that way. So what would you tell individuals who are struggling to express their emotions through text messaging? And, how can they improve their communication skills? And, sometimes I'll question myself, should I put that emoji? Should I not? I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And I did read a few of the text messages. Well, I read the book, and some of them come across as sarcastic, and like I advise my clients not to communicate in sarcasm, especially when they're first starting out in a relationship. So it's so easy to misinterpret things. So I'd love to hear, one or two tips.
Well, so just to be clear, the book isn't meant to be proscriptive, and that it's not telling people this is what you should do. I think everybody has to be themselves. And so you have to bring yourself to the table. What the book is helpful is really actually in understanding, well, who is this person I'm talking with? Because oftentimes our first interactions are over text, and that can be a big deciding point in terms of, is this somebody I want to bother to meet? Right? You have a lot of text conversations initially, and you want to be more selective about who you might go out on a date with. And so presumably the early text can give you some indication of what is this person going to be like to be with in person. And then I think in the early stages of a relationship, I think text conversations can also be both practical, meet me wherever at 4 p.m., but also give you a sense for maybe how this person communicates, what are their text love languages, as I talk about, are they a generous person? Are they a good listener? Are they talking about themselves or talking about you? Are they asking questions? Are they there are all kinds of cues that one can pick up on over text that I kind of go into in more detail in the book. And so I would say that all of these things are useful in assessing how a relationship's progressing. And it's not so much that people need to be coached on how should they talk, but more who are you dealing with? And is this what you're looking for? Is this person compatible with you? Presumably who you are is going to get naturally expressed in your own text messages. And, if you're not a particularly emotional person, maybe your text will come across as kind of flat.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's some etiquette that people should know by this point. I have a client who I absolutely adore, and we have a wonderful relationship. And sometimes she'll send me distress messages in all caps. Yeah. And I immediately go into this oh my God. And then, I get on a call with her and she's fine. And so, I know that there's certain etiquette that people at this point, we all know that all caps means you're yelling, but I guess some people didn't get the memo.
Right. So there possibly are takeaways that one can gather from the book. I do say the same thing about exclamation points. I think exclamation points have a slight pay attention to me quality. I think they can easily be overused. I'd say go light on those. The other tips I do give people is women, keep your text messages short. Men have a short attention span. They don't follow a long text. And, if you have to break it down into different bubbles for them, do that. Men, if you're going to give a woman a compliment, use a metaphor. Don't be too literal. Men are seen as more desirable and more intelligent if they're giving compliments in a metaphorical way. So I think those are sort of two take homes. I think there are certain conversations we squarely shouldn't have over text, and I almost wanted to include a sidebar in the book of 10 things you shouldn't discuss over text. Honey, I'm pregnant. Whatever it might be, but there are definitely things that are better reserved to be in person, where you can hold the person's hand, make eye contact, say something with more sensitivity and look at their face and see how they're responding. But another tip I give people is when they're writing a text, read it out loud. Don't just think about, because we often think it sounds a certain way, but by reading it out loud, you might get a better sense for how the recipient is going to interpret it. And so by doing that, we can edit ourselves just a little bit better and think about how is this going to come across. There are things like punctuation and emoji use, of course, that can either soften or harden a message. One study showed that people who put a period at the end of a sentence, particularly a short sentence, that's perceived as rude. It's a more formal way of writing, and maybe if your dad writes you that way, it's normal. But if a younger person's putting a period, that's going to be a little bit more abrupt looking. There are certain emojis, I think, like the really dramatic emojis like the loudly crying face, or the scream one, the one that looks like Monk's the Scream, that can be a sign of neuroticism when somebody's using a lot of dramatic emojis. Comma users tend to be a little less conscientious, whereas colon users are more conscientious. And things like word choice can betray people's personality too. So I give people all kinds of clues about both how to interpret someone's personality, but maybe also if you wanted to kind of turn the mirror on yourself, think about, okay, if I want to come across a particular way, what kind of punctuation should I use, or what kind of emojis should I veer towards?
I love that. I think that's such a unique way of approaching it. Essentially, you're giving them the tools so that they can empower themselves as a dater, or just in any relationship, while they're speaking in thumbs. And because as a dating coach, something that I oftentimes will do is I do tell them what they should do to very specific types of responses, and also to get very specific types of reactions that they want. But I can't encompass all situations that would happen in a text conversation, in which case then they have to reach out to me like, they said this, what do I do? Whereas if you give them the tools as you are, then it gives them the power to know how to respond in those types of situations based off of what they want out of that relationship. I love that. It's so funny you brought up like talking about how, emojis and punctuation and reading out loud, and just the way that this plays in my personal life is when I'm creating when I'm crafting a text message, I will often think about what my actual facial expression would be in real life as I was saying that, and I will try to find the emoji that best aligns with that actual facial expression.
That's great.
And so it's so funny because I've been told before that they're like, I can actually see you making this face as you're texting me. And I was like, that was intentional.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think some people have obviously better ability to put those things into words, and other people may rely more on emojis. An interesting study showed that actually introverts are more likely to use emojis than extroverts. So I think we all know what introverts and extroverts are at this point, but extroverts may be more comfortable using words just because they're more comfortable talking to people, whereas an introvert may need to really think about, okay, what's the facial expression, what's the tone I want to communicate here. And I think there are all sorts of clues about personality types based on the kind of messages people are writing. And I think another thing to think about once a relationship's underway, or a courtship, let's just say, is underway, maybe not quite a relationship, but courtship is thinking about, your own text love language and what's your partner's text love language. So lots of lip service has been given to the love languages in Gary Chapman's Love Languages and Relationships, but nobody's really looked at it in terms of texting. And so I break that down for people. I mean, again, I did create these categories of love text languages. But one, for instance, is riffing, which might be the equivalent of quality time, where you're just setting aside time to do some random back and forth with a person and banter. And some people quite like this. Other people might really veer towards what I call spoon feeding, where you're sending updates through the day about your day, what you're doing and so forth. And some people might really like getting those updates and it's reassuring for them, whereas somebody else might feel like that's intrusive. Nudging is another love language where you're asking the other person questions about what they're doing. How did that interview go? How was your dinner with your sister? And some people might like getting all those questions. Some people might prefer to wait to have that be in person. So I think being aware of what your own text love language is and what your partner's is can really help build that in the courtship phase, really build that rapport and see, one, determine whether there's compatibility, but two, perhaps if you play to your partner's strengths and, speak in the love language that they are receptive to, then you're more likely to kind of create a successful relationship there.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I'm curious how someone would ascertain what the love languages of this person is. Is something that you have in conversation because, for me personally, when I was first dating my husband, I would say to him, look, I'm not available during the day. I have this crazy job and I'm not going to be answering text messages, but know that I might read them, but I just can't respond. And I'll catch you at the end of the day or in the morning. And I would put that disclaimer out right away because I know people would get anxious, especially if you have an anxious attachment style and somebody sends you a message and you don't respond. But so is that your recommendation to have these conversations up front?
I think like setting expectations is great. Mm-hmm. And the last thing you want is if somebody, texts you good morning and then you don't get to that till 4 p.m. because you have a busy workday and they feel like you're not interested, and that's not the case, right? So I think setting expectations about what your bandwidth for texts are and how you like to communicate. But you can also pick up on this based on how the other person's communicating. Some people are, they won't communicate that much throughout the day, but then they'll sit down and have a good texting session with you at night where you're really kind of doing a lot of funny banter. Whereas other people might like the frequent touch points. And so I think trying to understand, well, in an ideal world, how can you meet your partner's needs with also paying attention to what your own preferences are.
Yeah, I think that something that's really important is paying attention to their text pattern. It's kind of one of the things you just mentioned. And
timing, timing and cadence.
Exactly. And as like when I'm doing matchmaking for clients, I have a lot of exchanges through text and email before like I actually introduce someone to one of my clients. And so when my client actually meets them, sometimes I'll hear, I haven't heard from them, or like they only text me once per day, or their text messages are really short, or that I can't interpret this tone. And I'll provide them that context. Like, I'm like, even in my text message and message exchanges with them that, could have been anywhere from a week to several weeks before they met them, I was like, that matches. I was like, I would hear from them intermittently. Sometimes maybe it took them a few days to respond, but when they did respond, it was thoughtful as opposed to just like quick one-word answers. And I'm like, this seems on par with what their communication style is over text. So I wouldn't read too much into it in terms of it being a lack of interest in you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think another thing to think about too is language style matching. And this is the research of James Pennebaker, who's an important psychological researcher into looking particularly at language and what role it plays. But when people like each other, I mean, you think about when we meet somebody in person and we have good chemistry with them, what are we going to do? We're going to make eye contact, probably going to lean in, we're going to match their body language. We have these things called mirror neurons in our brain that probably help us mirror people, to mirror their emotion. But we do it more when we feel a sense of compatibility with somebody, when we like them. The same thing naturally happens over text and actually in person too. We tend to mimic the language of a person that we're interested in. So we can actually take a text conversation, look at it, analyze it with a computer, and see, are these two compatible? Are they likely to get along? And it's based on this thing called language style matching. And language style matching isn't so much based on the nouns and verbs that we're using in our language. It's based on these little small stealth words. So pronouns, prepositions. Again, we try to mimic the style and the cadence of a person we're interested in. And so look for that early on too. And I think if you have good text chemistry, it'll be kind of obvious that there's a certain mimicry that's going on. It's not unlike the dances that you see in the Animal Kingdom where, two birds will do a little dance together when they're going through a courtship process and they're kind of mimicking each other's movements.
What's interesting about everything you've said, I mean, I'm learning so much, but going back to punctuation and, emojis and stuff like that, is this something that a person on the receiving end automatically feels like you have? Is it like a visceral reaction or whatever that you feel, or is this just based on like, do we need a dictionary or a checklist of this is what you do, this is what you don't do? Like,
so it's based on this concept of thin slicing. And what thin slicing is it's taking like a small data set and being able to extrapolate from that small data set. And our brains are actually really good at this. Our brains are really good at taking shortcuts. We can think about, you can walk into a room and you can pretty quickly read the room. You can look at a person's face, you can pretty quickly read it. And it's a visceral reaction. And I think with text, our brains are still catching up because it's a pretty new language. But we can train ourselves to be pretty good at recognizing, is this person interested? Are they not interested? Do we have a good chemistry here or don't we? Or what are they really like to be with? Is this the kind of person I want in my life? Do they ask a lot of questions, for instance? And so I think all of these things we can learn to do it, to suss it out in a visceral way. And of course, this is why my interest came to this, is I think that was something that I found myself doing. And so I wanted to actually break it down for people. What are the things you're actually looking for when you're viscerally making these reactions?
Yeah. For me, it's all about the gifts. Like I will, just even thinking about how my own text language, one, I am someone who likes to use punctuation. I wouldn't say it's always perfect grammatically, but I mean, it at least makes the statement more grammatical than I think most people do in text messages.
Yeah.
I could, of course, then, I could use better grammar, but I also don't want it to seem like I'm writing them an essay. So I'm like, all right, I was like, I'll use decent grammar where it seems like I'm still kind of being cool, but I'm also still don't look illiterate, or I still don't look illiterate. But then if I use short, choppy text messages with no punctuation, I'm pissed. That means like I don't even have the thought to, the energy to like process this politely. I'm like, you make me mad. Like, and then I'm like, all right. And if I am feeling really playful, I like to use GIFs. And to me, it shows, and to your point about like, does our languages connect? It does. It goes to a bigger concept of being culturally aware. Like, so I'm really good at selecting like scenes from movies or TV shows that perfectly encapsulate the conversation we're having in a really like kind of like sarcastic or witty or funny way. And if that person doesn't get it, I'm like, all right, we're not in tune with the same pop culture here.
Right. And that tendency to send the gifts that perfectly mirror the conversation, that might be like, I would say that that's also a love language too, that you might be more of a gift giving person, because that is actually giving a gift. And so, there's something generous about what you're doing there, right? And serving it up, and you want the other person to appreciate the gifts.
Yes, and it's very thought. It's like I always talk about how my love language is a mixture between gift giving and acts of service. I don't just want a random gift, like just buying me flowers or a candle or chocolates. Like I want the gift to be thoughtful and intentional about my needs.
Yeah.
Same thing with the gift. It's thoughtful, it's intentional, and it is a gift. I'm like, to you, like this is so clever and meaningful if you get what I mean, if you get the concept.
Yeah, no, and that's what I was guessing based on your description, is that you're a gifts and acts of service guy, and I guess that is true. So I think learning this about people and learning sort of how they best like to connect and how they best like to communicate can go a long way, and it can teach you whether you're compatible, but it can also teach you to be a better partner for the person that you are with.
Yeah. One of the questions that I always have when I'm texting is, am I being intrusive right now? Like, am I over, you get into a conversation with someone and you just want to kind of quickly respond, and then it's just a rapid fire back and forth, back and forth. And I worry about this with people who are dating, because sometimes, it could be a female, pursuing a guy, texting too much in the day, and the guy's just like, oh my God, this person. Because I've had these complaints as a matchmaker. We do feedback sessions with our clients. And so how does a person gauge how often they should be communicating as well? Because I think texting can be, I don't know, that's just my perception. I think it's a little bit intrusive sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think it's not intrusive if both parties are into it, and certainly can be a way to express interest. And again, I think you basically want, if you look at the two sides of the phone, think of it as like a seesaw. You want it to be not weighted all the way to one side, right? With one person doing all the bubbles on one side and no bubbles on the other. So I think you can look at your phone and get a kind of pretty clear sense of, are these bubbles, are they evening themselves out? And I think that's what you want to strive for, is and that gets into the whole language style matching, because you're not just matching their word choice, you're also matching in terms of cadence and response time, and in length of the text messages. So breezy matches breezy, and more serious might match more serious, and so forth.
What would you say the most valuable tool, like a few of the most valuable tools that someone can use to interpret another person's textual, textual chemistry, but more importantly, like what their text love language might be, in the initial courtship process?
Yeah, so the book, I break it down into 3 sections. There's the initial, who are you texting with, talking to strangers, figuring that out. And then the second part is about courtship and developing a relationship. And then the third part is about things like resolving conflict, and inflection points that you might find in a relationship. Is this getting more serious? Are we breaking up? And in that third section, I really talk about this idea of using your text as the electronic medical record of your relationship, because it's the written record of everything that took place. I think it's really funny that the iPhones just released this new feature now where you can unsend a text. And that is a game changer, right? Where you can take it back, maybe before they've read it. So I would say that early on, tips are about paying attention, asking questions. People forget to ask questions. Asking questions is how you're going to learn about the person. So it's about paying attention to how they're responding and asking the right questions. And I give people tools on how we as therapists, as psychiatrists, ask questions, and how you can kind of insert that a little bit into your conversation to learn a little bit more about the person that you're talking to. And this isn't in terms of diagnosing them. It's just about getting closer, right? Because this is how we get closer to people, as we ask questions and learn about them and bond or don't bond. And then in the second phase of the book, I do talk about this notion of love languages and compatibility, and how to recognize if it's there and how to encourage it if it's not. And then finally, this idea of resolving conflict, which more and more people are fighting over text and, bringing up grievances over text. So I give people tips on how to do it with respect, with acceptance, with compassion, all the good practices that any couples therapist would teach about communication, but applied to texting, because I think that is often the realm that these conversations are happening in right now. And so it's changed the way people can communicate. It's giving us more time to think, process what the other person's saying. So there's a lot of advantages, but there's the disadvantage of not being able to get that immediate reaction from them about what you've said.
I have to tell you that this is such a timely book because, like you said, we've been texting since 2007, and as Brandon mentioned, this is how everybody's communicating now. So if you need to be self-aware, and I think that what this book does is give you a lot of self-awareness about how you may be coming across, but also it gives you the tools to be able to determine what's happening in that relationship, the chemistry and all that good stuff. And I just think that this is amazing, Dr. Winsberg. I'm so happy that you did this. And it's something that I have extra books to send to my clients as well. And I highly recommend for people to buy this. The link is in the show notes. If you're interested in getting this book, I think you should, because right now, this is how everybody's communicating. And even if you're doing online dating, basically you're kind of texting on the app before you actually move to a call and things like that.
It's kind of the job interview, right? Like that's what's going to determine whether you get the first date, is those early texts. Yeah. It's rare that people are jumping on the phone before they're making a first impression. They're usually getting that first impression from your text, and you should be getting your first impression from their text. So it's a way to weed through, I think, a lot of conversations and figure out who's worth meeting and who's worth taking it to the next level with.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so thrilled to have you here. I know that a lot of people will go back and listen to this episode because it's so timely, so important for everybody to understand, like I said, how they're coming across and all that good stuff. And Dr. Winsberg, what's the best way for people to reach you if anybody wants to work with you?
People can email me. My website is drwinsberg.com. All my information's on there. You can follow me on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram. Although I have to confess, I'm not a huge poster when it comes to these things. But my primary job, of course, is running Brightside Health. We're treating people with depression, anxiety, all kinds of behavioral health conditions across the country. People can use their insurance to access such services. So that's primarily where I'm spending my time. But always happy to hear from people, and happy to hear their thoughts about the book or get any questions.
I love that. And I think I would love to bring you back to talk a little bit about these other things you're working on, because I know in our community of singles, there's a lot of stress, anxiety, and mental health issues that people are dealing with when it comes to just being single. So I would love for you to come back and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Brandon, thank you. Did you want to add anything, Brandon?
No, you covered it. I mean, this is such great information, and I learned a lot. And I think it's something that every single out there should have in their toolbox if they're trying to fast track their love life and they're really serious about navigating the digital dating world in a successful way.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, all the contact information is in the show notes, and you can reach me at Arlene Washburn on Instagram, and you can reach Brandon at Brandon Rader Official on Instagram. And what's your handle on TikTok? I know you're spending a lot of time there, Brandon.
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok at Psyched About You.
Awesome.